Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to start our second training session of the afternoon. If you want to grab a seat. We do have, for folks who are maybe putting down their ethics forms or grabbing some candy, we have seats in the front. If you do want to join us, for folks in the field, in the regions, if you want to perhaps grab a seat. If you're watching this by webcast and you're eating your lunch or having that coffee, now's the time to put it down. I'm always told it's like that old commercial, when the IG speaks, people listen. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. If folks want to grab a seat, so we start a mandatory training. And some of you might be asking, all right, Peter, this is new. IG training on whistleblower protection rights. And it is new, and it's an incredibly important topic. By way of background, over 20 years ago, back in 1989, Congress passed the Whistleblower Protection Act, which protects federal employees from reprisal should they blow the whistle, disclose fraud, waste, and abuse. Over 20 years later, in 2012, Congress was concerned. Despite this important piece of legislation, which in fact allows managers to be disciplined if they engage in reprisal, Congress found that still there were not sufficient protections for federal employees who engaged in whistleblowing. So in 2012, Congress passed the Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act, further protecting the rights of federal employees who engage in whistleblowing, ensuring that managers who engage in discipline can be disciplined, including removal, suspended, fined. It also provides for mandatory training for all employees. And the Office of Inspector General serves an important ombudsman role when it comes to whistleblower protections. So today, Counsel to the IG is going to be providing training on whistleblower rights and protections. And I'm so pleased to introduce a colleague and a friend, Athena Jones, who's with the Counsel to the IG's office. You might recognize Athena. In a prior life, she was actually up here doing ethics training. She previously served as HUD's Assistant General Counsel for Ethics. She had a great prior career to coming with HUD. She actually was a colonel in the United States Air Force for 26 years. So I'm going to turn it over to Athena to talk about this very important topic. Athena?
Thank you for that introduction, Peter. As Peter said, my name's Athena Jones. I'm from the Office of Inspector General, their Office of Legal Counsel, and I'm going to talk to you about whistleblower protections. I'm going to begin with a little example. Do you all know who Dan Snyder is? Owner of the Redskins? I'm a Cowboys fan. The Redskins won the game on Monday night. But I'm going to begin with a story about Dan Snyder. He has a beautiful home overlooking the Potomac. And unfortunately for him, at one time that view was obstructed by 50,000 square feet of trees and vegetation. Trees and vegetation on land controlled by the U.S. Park Service by means of a scenic easement. Now, there were those in the Park Service that thought that Dan Snyder's desire for an unobstructed view should come to pass. But there was a park ranger that did not think so. That park ranger was Bob Dano, and he didn't think that those trees and vegetation should be cut. He complained to the IG about this. The IG investigated. The IG found that the U.S. Park Service had violated its own policies and procedures when it allowed Dan Snyder to cut mature trees and replace them with saplings on this 50,000 square foot piece of property. The IG recommended that 2 managers within the U.S. Park Service be disciplined as a result. Now, our park ranger was an exemplary park ranger. He had won an award from the Department of Interior for valor. He had been twice nominated as the Park Ranger of the Year. He had received awards for meritorious service, and he had received awards for life-saving. Yet notwithstanding that, after he made this complaint, this whistleblower complaint, he suffered what he believed to be reprisal. He had his weapon taken away. He had previously been authorized to carry a gun. That authority was taken away. He was accused of theft, and I want to point out quickly that that was investigated and found to be unfounded. He was acquitted of any charges of theft. He was threatened with removal from his job. He was reassigned to a park in Virginia, a park that had 4 picnic tables. His duties included issuing permits to take a picnic on one of those picnic tables. Now, he settled with the Park Service as a result of these allegations of reprisal, but this example illustrates the importance of knowing whistleblower rights and protections, and this training will provide that to you. In order to provide you a better understanding of whistleblower protections, I'm going to go through a history of whistleblower rights and how we have come to where we are today. I'm going to talk about the role of managers and the role of the IG. Let's start by looking at the history. During the Civil War, there were unscrupulous suppliers to the soldiers. Boxes of sawdust were being delivered instead of rifles. Moth-eaten blankets were delivered. Sick horses were delivered, and Congress had just had enough. They passed the False Claims Act for two purposes. One was to encourage whistleblowers by giving them a percentage. There was a key tam provision wherein those who reported could get a percentage of the gain that the government got, and that was at that time 15 to 25%. And the second aspect in the False Claims Act is at that time it prevented someone from losing their job because of reporting of these unscrupulous practices. From then we jump to 1958 in the Code of Ethics for federal employees, and this was the first time employees had an affirmative obligation to report corruption when they saw it occur. Who can forget Senator Proxmire's Golden Fleece Award in the 1970s? And there were widespread excessive spending by the government during this time, and a lot of it, unfortunately, was focused on DOD. You might recall $400 hammers and $1,200 toilet seats. And these were reported to Congress, and it was thought that because whistleblowers suffered reprisal, or there was a fear of reprisal, that whistleblowers didn't step forward to report wrongdoing when they were aware of it. So that led to the Civil Service Reform Act, which is the first legislation which provided protections for whistleblowers, protections for federal employees stepping forward to report wrongdoing. This was followed by the Whistleblower Protection Act, which provided additional protections for whistleblowers, and it strengthened the authority of the Office of Special Counsel in dealing with potential reprisal that whistleblowers were subjected to. The No Fear Act followed that, and that act, the purpose was to hold agencies accountable for their conduct. And most recently, the Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act of 2012 provided additional protections to whistleblowers, provided provisions on non-disclosure agreements, and strengthened the authority of the Office of Special Counsel. Well, we're talking about whistleblowers. What is a whistleblower? A whistleblower can make a disclosure of corruption, mismanagement, illegal activity, or other wrongdoing. And if you're a current federal employee, a former federal employee, or someone seeking a position with the federal government, you are protected. I would also note that there's a pilot program underway to offer these same protections or like protections to employees of federal contractors and employees of grant recipients. I said you could report disclosures of corruption, mismanagement, illegal activities, or other wrongdoing. You have an affirmative obligation to make these reports. I'm going to give you a somewhat gruesome example of a whistleblower, and this is a USDA inspector, a young USDA inspector who felt like the USDA's method in their slaughterhouses was inhumane to the animals, and specifically hogs. The method used by the USDA was to give an electrical shock to the hog and render them unconscious, and then they were bled to death. The shocking and unconsciousness meant that the hog would not have any feeling after that point in time. This young inspector said that she saw evidence that the hogs were conscious and reported this. The USDA took steps to remove her from her duties as a result. She complained. The USD Office of Civil Rights went back and said, you need to reinstate her, give her back her duties, allow her to continue to be an inspector. Her supervisors didn't follow the advice provided and took steps to remove her from her position. She resigned her position. The Office of Special Counsel has recently stepped in, and she has been reinstated because of that constructive removal that she suffered as a result of potential reprisal for reporting the inhumane treatment of these hogs. And I should point out, in the course of this activity of her whistleblowing, the USDA IG conducted an investigation and found that USDA inspectors were thwarted in any efforts to come forth to report inhumane treatment of animals in these slaughterhouses. This is just one example of several that I'm going to give you about people stepping forward, having the courage to step forward and report these instances of wrongdoing. Well, if you're going to make a report, who do you make it to? You could make it to a supervisor, someone in your chain of command. You could make it to the Office of Inspector General. You could make it to the Office of Special Counsel. Now, the Office of Special Counsel is an independent federal agency that will investigate allegations of reprisal and investigate instances for you if you feel you've been treated unfairly. I dropped my pamphlet. This pamphlet is put out by the Office of Special Counsel, and it's Know Your Rights When Reporting Wrongs. You can have this available. I have it on a table. You could pick one up when you leave. It is also available on our website, on HUD's website. If you look under Whistleblower Protections, you'll find this pamphlet, and it's also available on the Office of Special Counsel website, which is osc.gov. But it provides a lot of valuable information. You can also report instances of wrongdoing to Congress. I've stated that you have a duty to report, and we heard this in the introductory remarks to this training when Secretary Castro and Acting Deputy Secretary Konofsky talked about the importance of transparency with this agency and talked about the importance of stepping forward and supporting the work that we do with families and communities that we serve, and also the importance of uncovering any mismanagement or fraud, waste, and abuse in seeking to fulfill that mission that we have. Now, Secretary Castro and Inspector General Montoya sent out a letter to all HUD employees in August of this year, and there he emphasized the importance of working together, the importance of supporting the IG, and the importance of not taking any action whatever that would inhibit the cooperation with the IG in their investigations. Because what we want people to come forward and report incidents of mismanagement, of fraud, of waste, of anything that would undermine the effectiveness of this organization. Now, when you make a disclosure, it falls into two categories: protected and unprotected. And you really want any disclosure you make to fall into the protected category. Now, I'm going to talk a minute about the protected disclosures. It doesn't have to be accurate. It doesn't matter what the motive was for the reporting. What matters is the person reporting it believed it to be true at the time. Now, let me give you an example. Say Sam does not like Sally. In fact, he despises her. He wants her job. And he believes that she has used her federal government card to finance her daughter's wedding. So he reports this. He reports this not because he wants HUD to engage in the right thing. He reports this because he wants to get rid of Sally so he can have an opportunity to move up. That doesn't matter. The motivation for that report doesn't matter. As it turns out, he was mistaken. She did not use a federal credit card to finance her daughter's wedding. The fact that he was mistaken doesn't matter as long as he believed it to be true at the time he made it. So what you look at is, did the individual stepping forward believe that that conduct was true at the time? Again, motivation doesn't matter, and whether it was actually true doesn't matter. Now let's talk briefly about unprotected communications. And when you think about this, the name Snowden should come to mind. Now, I realize that he's not a federal employee, but if you look at the types of information that he released, you might see that it would fall under the classified category or the information that might be prohibited by law from being released. You don't ever want to find yourself in a position where that's the kind of information you're releasing because it's unprotected, and these whistleblower protections would not cover you for an unprotected disclosure. But you can shift that unprotected disclosure into the protected range by reporting it to the Office of Inspector General or the Office of Special Counsel. Just when you step forward and do that, identify that you have sensitive information that you're going to be bringing forth. We all recall the unfortunate situation that the Veterans Affairs found themselves in, particularly out in Phoenix. And I'm going to talk to you about 3 cases from the Phoenix VA Medical Center that were recently settled, and they were settled within the last 30 days. The first case involved a Dr. Mitchell. Dr. Mitchell was head of the ER at the Phoenix VA Medical Center and had been the head of the ER for a period of 16 years. She came forward and reported that she suffered, or that her office suffered from critical understaffing and inadequate training on triage in the emergency room. Her tenure as the director of the emergency room came to a halt. She recently settled with the VA, where she was put in charge of, put in a position where she could oversee the quality of medical care within that VA regional hospital. The next individual was someone involved in communications, and she stepped forward in reporting gross mismanagement of funds by prior leadership. What happened to her? Well, she was relieved of her duties. She was accused of wrongdoing, and investigations were unsubstantiated. She was moved to an office in the library in the basement. The third individual that came forward, and there were many, the third individual that came forward was an analyst, and he reported that the management there at that Phoenix VA Medical Center were manipulating statistics, that there were extraordinarily long wait times for primary care appointments, and that the appointment time was, or management was juggling the statistics with this appointment times to make it appear as though they were not as extensive as they were. As a result of his reporting this mismanagement of patient wait times, his outstanding performance evaluation was downgraded by a supervisor that knew he had made these reports. He settled recently with the VA for an undisclosed settlement with the aid of the Office of Special Counsel. Now, these 3 people were very courageous in stepping forward and reporting this wrongdoing and bringing whistleblowing to the light. And as a result, the VA has stepped forward and has changed the way they operate. They've appointed a position where someone can oversee medical centers and oversee any allegations or complaints made in medical centers. They've taken an aggressive stance for dealing with any allegations of reprisal against those who have stepped forward. And so you can see, as a result of people like these 3 who have stepped forward, there's a tangible, visible result in an agency that came to pass. You can make a whistleblower complaint without putting your federal career in jeopardy, and you can make a complaint without reprisal. Now, you're protected from reprisal if you're a current federal employee or a former federal employee or someone applying for a federal job, and you report instances of wrongdoing to appropriate authorities, and we talked about that, your supervisor, the IG, the Office of Special Counsel, or Congress. And it has to be a protected disclosure. Well, we've talked about reprisal. What is reprisal? Well, that might be, adverse personnel action that's improperly taken against you. And I've given several examples. Well, if you're a park ranger and you can't carry a weapon, that might be reprisal. If you're assigned de minimis duties such as issuing warrant or permits to have a picnic at a park with only 4 picnic tables, that might be reprisal. If you're threatened with your job, that you threaten to be fired, that might be reprisal. If you're put in such a position that you just quit your job because you just can't take it anymore, that constructive removal could be reviewed as reprisal. We had the instance where the communications individual was assigned to duties in the basement. That could be reprisal. So these are just examples of reprisal that one could encounter. And downgrading a performance report is another one. And these are examples of whistleblowers that have suffered reprisals, but as managers, you need to guard against reprisals against those that support whistleblowers, against those that cooperate with a whistleblower, that cooperate in investigations regarding whistleblower, either through the IG or through the Office of Special Counsel. Whistleblowers are very important. And there was a recent PricewaterhouseCoopers study that showed over 40% of fraud in the private sector was uncovered because whistleblowers had the courage to step forward and report it. This as compared to less than 20% that was uncovered by trained auditors. Now, these statistics would mirror those in studies found by the Department of Justice and the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. The bottom line is fraud, waste, and abuse is uncovered because employees have the courage to step forward and report that fraud, waste, and abuse. Let's look now at management actions. HUD employees have a duty to come forward. You heard Secretary Castro state that, and that's been echoed throughout. You have a duty to come forward and report fraud, waste, and abuse. And as managers, when someone steps forward, you should listen to them. If you have the authority to take action and address that, you should. Allow people to cooperate in investigations as they take place. Because we need to make sure that whistleblowers feel like they can step forward and report the fraud, waste, and abuse that they believe is taking place. Managers also have an obligation to ensure that non-disclosure agreements are properly worded. And what do I mean by this? You can't waive your right to report fraud, waste, and abuse in a non-disclosure agreement. You can't waive your right to make a report or cooperate with the IG or Office of Special Counsel. You can't waive your right to go to Congress with allegations of fraud. There are certain things that you cannot waive in a non-disclosure agreement, and you should be aware of that. Now, for an individual to show reprisal, and management should be aware of what an individual must show to put this forward. Well, they have to show it's a protected disclosure. We've talked about that. You have to show that there was reprisal. You have to show that the agency had knowledge of the whistleblower activity. Gina Gray reported gross mismanagement at this country's premier federal cemetery, Arlington National Cemetery. She's the one that stepped forward and said mismanagement is so severe that the gravestones don't match the graves. It is just very sad and an embarrassment really to the country that premier cemetery for this country, where we have the tomb of the unknown soldier, has graves that are marked improperly. She's the individual that reported this. She reported it anonymously. Well, subsequently to that report, there was action taken to fire her from her position. I don't want to talk about whether she should or should not have been fired. What I want to talk about is the IG investigated and found that those people that took action to fire her did not know she had made that complaint. That was an anonymous complaint, and they did not know she was the one that made it. So you have to show that there was knowledge on the part of management when they're taking the reprisal action. And this is important because when you take action, it's that knowledge. At one time, the whistleblowing activity had to be the primary, the sole reason for the reprisal. Now it just has to be a significant factor for reprisal. And that's as a result of the Whistleblower Enhancement Act of 2012. Just earlier this month, there was a situation where an Army police officer who had served 10 years as a police officer, over 10 years, had always received outstanding performance evaluations. He reported that 2 of his fellow officers were improperly receiving LEAP pay, law enforcement availability pay, to the tune of $25,000 annually for each of those 2 other officers. The IG investigated this, DOD IG investigated and found that it was true and stopped any future LEAP payments to these officers. Subsequent to that, and the police officer here, Mr. Delano, was quite vocal in taking credit for bringing this to light. He found that his police car, his patrol car, had problems in the steering. So he took it into the shop and found that the car had been damaged. So who better to investigate the cause of the damage than someone that no longer receives LEAP pay? Now, Officer Delano complained about the unfairness of having someone that suffered as a result of a previous complaint that he made investigate allegations against him. His supervisors thought that this individual could do a good job regardless, and the investigation continued. As a result of that investigation, the investigating officer reported that Mr. Delano lacked candor during the course of the investigation, and action was taken to remove him from his position. And subsequent to that letter of removal, another charge was added, that he was discourteous to other officers. Now, the Office of Special Counsel stepped in and put a stay on any removal actions, but I might suggest that perhaps he should have made another complaint to the IG a little earlier than after he was successful the first time when he saw this was taking place, because the IG will investigate matters. We do this, you report it to your supervisor, to IG, to OSC, to Congress, and frequently OSC will refer matters back to the agency, and the agency will have the IG investigate those matters. In fact, the VA, in part of they have a number of cases of whistleblower complaints, but with regard to the Veterans Health Administration, they have 89 pending cases, and 53 have been referred back for investigation by the agency, and the IG is the arm of the agency which would conduct those investigations. We conduct a lot of investigations. We protect confidentiality to the extent of the law. We gather documents. We interview witnesses. We know how to conduct an investigation. In the arena of whistleblower activities, we also have the responsibility to train agency employees, and that's what I'm doing now, is providing you training on whistleblower protection. The IG also has a responsibility of appointing an ombudsman. I am that ombudsman for HUD. And I'll track any complaints if someone wants to bring them forward to ensure that they are addressed properly. You can find out more about the Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act and my role as the ombudsman either at HUD's website or the HUD IG website. And you can contact me if you have something you want to complain about or bring to my attention. You can send it to whistleblower@hudoig.gov or my personal email at ajones@hudoig.gov. Now, we've talked about the background from the Civil War to the present and how there's an important role for whistleblowers to have the courage to step up and report fraud, waste, and abuse, and how it's important for managers not to take reprisal actions against any whistleblower that does step forward. We've talked about the role of the IG and how we can investigate and how we can train individuals and provide an ombudsman role for that. Again, you can find out information about the whistleblower protections on the OSC website, on your HUD website, on our HUD IG website. It's out there. And again, if you have questions, you can come to me personally and I'll address them with you. Thank you so much for your time.